I don't know if you've noticed, but on the last few pages we worked on, we have a little problem. We can't actually see the logo because while the logo is white on the homepage and that looks great, on these other pages, we can't see white on white. Now, if I will edit this component and change the logo to black, that's a problem because now the logo here is going to be black and we're not going to see it here. So what do we do? In one sense, we do want this to be a component that changes if we make changes in one element so that all pages look the same. However, sometimes we do have variants, right? Sometimes I want the logo white and sometimes I want the logo black. Also, we have, we've got the footer here, and most of the times on most of the pages we've got this call to action that is purple, but on some of the pages it's actually white. So let's see how we're going to do that, and we're going to do this by creating component variants. So let's go into our components, the navbar components, and I'm going to double click that to edit it. Now if I'm going to click on the logo here, you will see from the style selector I'm able to create component variants, and let's click on that. You can see that we have a base variant, which is how it currently looks, and I can create a new one. So new one, let's call this black logo, and hit return. And now you can see that I have a different class here. This is a different variant of this class. And for this, let's go and change the text color from white to black. And now we can see it with black, and that's great. So let's go out, and it's still white. Why? Because you can see we're using the base variant, and we can change to black logo variant, which basically solves the problem. That's amazing. Let me double click this and go back here just so that we can actually rename this base variant to white logo. I think that's going to be easier now when I'm switching off different pages. I can just decide whether I want white logo or black logo. And that's great. This is still a component. It's still connected, but I can switch between different variants. And that is fantastic. Now there is one more variant that we want to create here. So we've got the button here. And so far we've just created a normal button and styled it. But sometimes we have a button that has this little arrow. Now let's go ahead and do that. But the first thing that I can see is that when this is a button element, I can't actually add elements inside of this button. So to create that, let's actually bring in a link block and recreate our button. Okay, so I'm going to give this the button class, button primary class, and bring in text inside. So let's add a text block and right here, discover my journey or whatever, button text. For some reason, this button currently does not override or has the text in black, so let's set it to white, and let's remove the text decoration. It didn't matter on this button, but here obviously it does matter. So we now have the same button, only we've created it from a link block, which means that I can also add in an image inside and select this little button arrows that we have here. Now to put them one next to another, let's go ahead and turn this into a flex element, give this a little bit of a padding here, and now we've got this button. So this is great, but let's turn that into a component so that we can reuse that and create variants. So I'm going to create a component from this button, and I'm going to call this button. And now we've got this button component. But unlike this navigation, which has the same text in it, in this button, I want to, number one, create variation with arrow and without arrow. And I also want to make the text different on each one of these instances. So to do that, first of all, I'm going to select this text block. In the button text, I can add here, you can see I can create and connect a new property. So let's create that, and we'll call this button text. And now we've got this property. So now if I'm copying and pasting, and I have a lot of different instances of this button, for each of them I can edit. This is discover my journey. And what other buttons did we have here? Let's collaborate. So this is going to be let's collaborate. So this is great. So now we have a component that has a property that we can edit, like the text. And let's make the button, let's make its visibility. You can see that when I'm holding the button, I've got the visibility here. I can make it visible or hidden. Let's turn the visibility into a property. Okay, so let's call this arrow visibility and create that. So now for every button that we're editing, we can edit the text, but we can also edit the arrow visibility. So now we've got customizable, contact me without arrow. Now we've got a much smarter component that is customizable. The text is customizable, the arrow visibility is customizable. And as you can see, you can create variants, and components can be very, very powerful. Okay, so let's clean up this mess. And let's also create, let's go ahead and create the footer. We haven't created the footer. What do we have in the footer? So we've got actually this section and this section. We've actually got two sections inside of this footer element. So inside the footer elements, what do we've got? We've got nothing here, actually. So let's bring in section and give it a class of section. And then inside, let's bring in a container with a class of container. And then we need two of these. So the first one needs to have a background of this bubblegum or lavender, BG color. We don't actually have lavender. So let's go ahead and duplicate this class, change the name to lavender, and change the background color. Select the lavender variable. So now we've got the background. What do we've got on this container? We've got this H2. So let's bring in H2 here. H2. I can see already that all of this thing is centered. So maybe we can go ahead into this container and add text align center, text center. And then what do we have? We've got this text large, body large. So let's bring in text block. Let's paste the text and let's apply text large. Fantastic. And lastly, we have a button. At this point, we are going to add from our components button. Fantastic. Oh my God, this is not the button that we want. Let's collaborate. Let's collaborate without an arrow. Okay, so what we actually need to apply to this container is, number one, I can see that there's kind of like a maximum width here that is different, that is much smaller, and everything is centered maybe in like a flex box, so this button is not trying to fit all the way. So actually, let's go ahead and give this container, instead of text center, I'm just going to give this like a custom, let's call this CTA section. And I'm just going to turn this into a flex box that is centered vertically. And that maybe has, instead of a max width, this has a max width that is much smaller, like 800 pixels, and is text align center. Okay, but why is the heading 2 has so much line height? Something here is wrong. Oh, it's got line height of 130 pixels instead of 130%. Okay, that is great. Okay, to the CTA section, I'm going to add a little bit of a gap and maybe a little bit of margins top to bottom to space this out. Okay, so this is great. And this one should just have logo, and I guess this was something like a year. Don't remember what it was here. I think I ruined it. This is actually the logo white. Maybe we can just copy it from here. Let me just copy the nav logo, go into our navigation. This section needs to have BG color black, which we don't have already. Now, by the way, now I've made a mistake, and it's important for you to see my mistake. I created a new class, this BG color black, on top of section, which means that it's not being created as a utility class, which I'll be able to use down the line. It was created as a combo class that I can only apply on section. So just going to undo that because, again, undo. This is not what I want to do. If I actually want to create a new utility class, I'll add an empty div. I'm going to create BG color black now, apply black color, delete this div, and now I can reapply this color wherever I want. And this is great. So did I copy the logo? Let's try to paste. Yeah, we do have the logo here, and we probably need to bring in text block that has the year or copyright or something. And then let's select the container, and let's call this footer container. Just so that we can turn that into a flex box with the element spaced between. Yeah, that wasn't a good idea to put the flex box inside of the container. So let me undo that. Let me undo that again. Let's just wrap this in a div, and we'll call this footer content to turn this one into a flex. Where is this text? I want this text to be white. So footer content, I'm going to set as white. Copyright, rights 2002. What year is this? Oh my God. Okay. Let's align them to the center, spaced between. They're centered, but maybe should be aligned to the bottom. Okay. So now we've got the footer, which we can start. We need to just create the variant. This, obviously, we already have the footer on all pages, but on this page, on the projects page, we want to create a variant. So here, yeah, obviously, you don't want purple background for the page, and then this purple as well. So let's double click this for the footer. Let's create variant that has white BG. And we're just going to go ahead and change the background to white. And fantastic. we can go and choose white background. And of course, we can rename the variant. But you got the deal. We've got variants for the header, for the navigation. We've got variants for the footer. We've got different variations for the buttons. And this is how powerful components